Hello everyone, welcome to my much overdue history of the American Revolution. Let's begin. From 1620 onwards through the 16 and 1700s, England sent colonists to occupy what later became the 13 colonies. The most famous expedition, of course, being the Mayflower, which I don't need to go into in this history video though. The most notable person who arrived in the United States was a simple man who went by the name George. In 1754, the British and French had a disagreement over where their borders in North America should be, and they also had a disagreement over who should be the better colonizer and who should colonize North America. This sparked the French and Indian War. It lasted until 1763. During it, the British and French employed Native Americans on both sides to fight against the opposing side. The British won. One of the people who helped them win was Lieutenant Colonel George Washington. Around 3,000 people died. France then lost all of their land in North America. Although the French and Indian War was a British victory, it caused England to become broke, which is why the enemy of this thing, George III of England, began taxing the colonists. His excuse to do this was that because he was protecting the colonists during that war, he should be able to tax them if they ran out of money. The colonists did not like this. On March 26, 1765, the Stamp Act began, which taxed anyone selling anything paper, whether it was a letter, a book, a pamphlet, even playing cards. Later, this act was repealed, and this is what began some of the hate, which will later begin the American Revolution. From June 15th to July 2nd, 1767, the British passed the Townshend Acts, which tried to get the colonists to believe that the British would continue to rule them. Later, they also repealed this. On March 5th, 1770, a few colonists in Boston began heckling a group of British soldiers. At first, they began shouting at them. Later, they began throwing rocks and, oddly enough, oyster shells at them. What was their response? The Boston Massacre. It was a murder. 5 people were killed, starting with an African-American named Crispus Attucks. Prior to this, the colonists had only hated the British in a more verbal tone, but now they had another idea. How about a revolution? This massacre made the colonists very upset with the British. What was their response? They decided to have a party. Not just any party, a tea party. Not just any tea party, the Boston Tea Party. On December 16th, 1773, 116 colonists, that's a reported number, led by the Sons of Liberty, a revolutionary organization disguised as Mohawk Native Americans, and then began dumping chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. They dumped around 340 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. Oh man, did the British and King George III lose it. As a result of this, King George III and the British Parliament, aka the British Congress, shown above, passed the Intolerable Acts, which were meant to punish the colonists for taking part in the Boston Tea Party. These acts were also repealed and lasted from March to June of 1774. On September 5th, 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. It consisted of 56 delegates from all but one colony, Georgia, oddly enough. In this Congress, George Washington was made Commander-in-Chief of the Americans. They began calling themselves the Americans and not the British colonists, as they wanted to make a new country, the United States of America. On March 23rd, 1775, Patrick Henry gave his now infamous speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." This speech was highly successful and pushed even more revolutionary ideas amongst the Americans. On April 18th, 1775, Paul Revere and 2 other people, one of which I might be related to, rode from Charleston to Lexington in Massachusetts, warning about the invading British. The next day, on April 19th, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord and the American Revolution began. These began with the famous shot heard round the world, where an unknown person shot against the British, which began the American Revolution. The Americans won both battles. Around 79 British soldiers were killed. Oh, and this is kind of random. I've been to Boston, and I've also been to Paul Revere's house. So anyways, this is a painting showing the battles of Lexington and Concord, in case you were wondering. On June 17th, 1775, the Americans found the British, who had retreated from the previous two battles, and then fought them once again. The Americans, led by William Prescott, who I might be related to as well, and the British, led by William Howe, then fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Just as many people on both sides who died from gunshot also died from heat exhaustion. Can you imagine wearing 2 layers of leather clothes on a scorching hot Boston day? Nonetheless, it was an American victory, and around 1,000 British and about 450 American soldiers died. I have also been to Bunker Hill in real life. Today, they have an obelisk built on it, which you can climb. Although it was pretty scary climbing those steps. It was really narrow. Anyways. In January of 1776, Thomas Paine's Common Sense booklet was published. It was a 50-page pamphlet that told the Americans to start again fighting in the Revolution. Today, it is one of the most sold and iconic booklets in American and world history. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, was signed. Now, there was no going back for the Americans. If they lost this revolution, George III would have his way, and Washington and the rest of Congress would be hung. And another little random thing, I've also seen the real Declaration of Independence in person in Washington, D.C. It's kind of cool. On December 26, 1776, Washington and his army crossed the Delaware River, leading to this extremely famous painting that I would argue is the most famous painting in American history. After he crossed, in a few days, he would later fight in what would begin the end for the British. In case you're wondering why I'm uploading this today, it's because today's the day the Battle of Saratoga would have started. Anyways, on October 17th, 1777, the Battle of Saratoga was fought. It was a humongous American victory and a humongous British defeat. This was the turning point of the American Revolution, marking the beginning of the end for the British. 90 Americans and 444 British soldiers died in this skirmish. In September of 1790, after being publicly denounced by George Washington twice, Benedict Arnold had had enough. He then committed treason and defected to the British. Will this be a mistake? Find out. From September to October of 1781, the British had fled to Yorktown. George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette, leader of the French, then dug in for a siege. On October 19, 1781, General Cornwallis, leader of the last British at Yorktown, surrendered, unofficially ending the American Revolution. But we're not just done yet. As the French and British loved finding every opportunity to flank each other, this time the French were fighting against the British. This later caused their country to go bankrupt and later led to the French Revolution, and their 2 kings and queens at the time will later be executed. Anyways, if you want to see that, watch my History of France video. It's pretty good in my opinion. I hope you like it. Anyways, let's finish this off. On September 3rd, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Guess where? Ending the American Revolution. By its end, 6,800 Americans and 25,000 British soldiers had died in the American Revolution. Coming up next in this 4-part series, the second part, the Civil War, will be coming up next. See how a country splits into 2 factions, later on becoming the bloodiest conflict in American history. Coming up next is the Civil War. I hope you watch that. And with that, that is my history of the American Revolution. Thank you all so much for watching. I spent a lot of time working on this. I didn't anticipate it for taking about 5 hours to do this, but that is normally how long it takes me to make these history videos. And thank you for watching. Enjoy your day/night. Coming up next is the Civil War. Thanks for watching.